my heart, Lord. Open the eyes of my heart. I want to see you.
So I've asked this morning, when we had our regular speaker supposed to be here unavailable, I thought, well, that is a gift from God. We'll take the opportunity to talk a little bit about this virus, and just one of the things studies show is information, good information, can be helpful. And so I know a lot of us have a lot of questions. And so we're going to have Dr. John Lorette. Many of us have known he was a ER doctor for many years, and now works, has been working with Mercy and a lot of different capacities with the hospital there, but probably the most knowledgeable man I know on the medical side of things. I asked Robert Curley also to come. Robert works with Missouri Extension. Initially, I'd asked Dalen Dutzman to come, one of the top people of public health in this region, but Dalen was unable to be here, and probably wisely unable to be here because his compromised immune system. But Robert's also with the Missouri Extension, and I asked Robert to consult Dalen and some others and help give us some information on that side. And then I also asked one of our elders, Jim Sneed, to kind of give us some information about logistically what the elders have been talking about and how we're going to proceed from here, understanding that changes, it seems, hour by hour with the information we get. And so why don't we go ahead and have John Lorette begin, and then we'll go to Robert and then Jim. And then if we have time, we'll have some question and answer, so be thinking about questions you might have that are not addressed here. John?
Good morning. Thank you, Steve. I was asked this morning to talk about the coronavirus and what we do to protect ourselves. And we all know that there's a lot of information out there and misinformation. So I want you to realize that I've gone to sources like the World Health Organization, the Centers for Disease Control, New England Journal of Medicine, and other prominent sources that that medical professionals live by. But we have to realize that this information is changing daily. What I will present now may be different come tomorrow or next week, but it's my understanding of what's going on at this time. There's two ways to look at this. You can look at it from a doomsday perspective, or you can look at it, as I will try this morning, from a rational perspective with what we know now. What is the difference between a bacteria and a virus? So bacteria are 100 times larger than a virus. We can't see them, they're microscopic. You have to have special microscopes. But bacteria are one-cell organisms that are able to live and divide on their own, independently. They're found naturally in our bodies and environment, and 99% of them are harmless. 1% of them cause disease. They help us digest our food, provide nutrients, fight cancer cells, and destroy other disease-causing organisms. One of the most famous bacterial infections we can read about in history is Yersinia pestis. That was the Black Plague in Europe around the mid-1300s. What's a virus? A virus is much smaller than a bacteria, 100 times smaller. It is simply a protein outer shell with genetic material on the inside. They do not divide like a bacterium and live independently. They need living cells, like our living cells, in order to infect, invade, and what they do is they inject their genetic material into ours, rewire our genetic material, destroy the cells, and then proliferate that way. And again, most viruses are pathogenic. They cause disease. How many times have we heard about polio, smallpox, AIDS, Ebola, dengue? I mean, there's a lot of them. Now, a virus has to look for particular cells. A hepatitis virus, hepatitis A, is looking for a liver cell. That's the cell it needs in order to penetrate and infect and proliferate. It can't go to a respiratory cell and divide and live. It can't go to any other cell. It has to go to the liver. All right, so what's so special about coronavirus? Coronaviruses have been around for millennia. I probably have had a coronavirus like many of you, common cold. 5 to 10% of community-acquired upper respiratory infections are caused by coronaviruses. However, the coronavirus that we're hearing about now is new, de novo. We have never been exposed to this particular virus before. And that's what's causing so much concern. So the virus was identified back in December in Wuhan, China. It was causing pneumonia, a cluster of pneumonia cases, and the disease now is called COVID-19. Now, there have been 2 previous coronavirus infections that we have heard about. SARS, which causes about 10% of people to pass, and MERS. These are acronyms used for other coronaviruses that have been serious infections in the past. So if we're infected by one of these coronaviruses, then our body mobilizes an immune system response. And so what do we develop? Fever, sore throat, runny nose, cough, body aches, muscle aches, fatigue. It's going to be just like flu symptoms. It's going to be just like cold symptoms. And how many of us now are having symptoms of our allergies because of the warm weather? So again, usually you're going to have more fever and other things going on there. So currently the risk in the United States compared to other places in the world, the World Health Organization is saying that the United States is a limited community transition. So who's susceptible? Older individuals, again, that age range changes. I mean, who's elderly anymore? So they're saying 60 years of age, diabetics, emphysema, if you're actively undergoing chemotherapy, not if you've had it in the past, but if you are undergoing chemotherapy now, if you're immunocompromised in any way, transplant patient, you are an individual that needs to talk to your doctor to decide what you need to do. So as tests become more available, who needs to get tested? The important thing is to remember that how long we shed this virus depends on how severe the illness is. The more severe someone has symptoms, when you're in the hospital on a ventilator, you're shedding much higher quantities of virus than somebody who's asymptomatic. They still may be shedding, but so how do we get viral specimens? So you do throat swabs, nasal swabs. About 72% of specimens from sputum will be positive, 32% from the throat or the nose. And testing multiple regions will improve your sensitivity. So as I understand it from the meeting that I attended on Friday, Mercy, Cox, and Jordan Valley are going to create a collection site this week, if the test kits are available, where you just drive up and get tested. Now, in order to be tested, you have to be referred to that site. You can't just drive up and say, I want to be tested. So that limits who will actually go, because you don't want individuals just running to the ERs, urgent cares, and hospitals. It's best to keep individuals who potentially could be infected elsewhere. But again, people aren't going to know the results of these tests for several days. So that's why it's best just to collect and hold off and quarantine yourself. So I just wanted to share, if I'm in the urgent care and someone comes in and they're concerned that they have COVID-19, what am I going to do? I'm going to check them for flu. Influenza is much more common right now, even though it's falling off. And a respiratory viral panel tells us if they have adenovirus and a number of other things. That's much more common than the coronavirus right now. If all those are negative and they're having cough and other symptoms, then that's somebody who you have a higher suspicion to go ahead and draw those specimens to see if they have the virus. So the last thing I wanted to talk about is how to protect yourself. One of the best things about this coronavirus that we know, because we've known about it for a long time, is that the outer shell, the crown, is very susceptible to detergents and to alcohol and to heat. So the alcohol wipes and washing your hands is going to eliminate the virus. Don't worry about that. It's going to kill it. It has in the past, and it continues to. But remember, that virus, even though it's on my hand, is not going to infect me. Even though it's on my hair, where does it have to go? It has to go into my respiratory tract. That's the cells it's looking for. So that's why we don't want to touch our nose, our mouth. We don't want to give any port of entry to our respiratory tract. That's where that coronavirus is going to attach the cells, inject its RNA, and multiply, divide, and go out that way. So how long does this virus live outside of a cell that it just attacked? So my understanding, again, the information that I got, on a metal surface, it'll live less than 6 hours. On paper or wood, about a day or two. And on plastic, up to 3 days. I was surprised to hear that Friday. So if you're getting food from the grocery store, just wash the packaging. Make sure you try to eliminate as much of the possibility there. And then the last thing about masks. When should we be wearing masks? A mask is not going to prevent me from getting the infection, unless it's an N95 mask, which is in hospitals. If I'm coughing, sneezing, having symptoms, and I'm having a fever and I might have it, it's best for me to put a mask on so I don't transmit it to you. And again, what can we do? Eat well, sleep well, and avoid being anxious, depressed, because all that just increases our cortisol levels, and that stress just limits our immune system. So avoid the panic. Most people are going to be just fine. Thank you.
Well, I'm sure many of you are just as surprised as I am to see me up here speaking about this subject today. So let me just say from the outset, I am not an expert in public health systems. But as the old saying goes, I know a guy. As Steve said earlier, his first choice here was to reach out to Dalen Dutzman. Many of you know Dalen, but you may very well know Dalen as that Mopar hot rod enthusiast. Many of you know Dalen from your interactions with him here, but you may not know that Dalen is director of the Ozarks Public Health Institute. He has a doctorate in public health, and he teaches a variety of university-level courses focusing on this subject. He's currently president of the Missouri Public Health Association and president of the Missouri Institute of Community Health, and he's known throughout this state for his leadership on statewide, regional, and local boards, committees, and various coalitions. When it comes to public health, Dalen is that guy. And so this morning, what I hope to be able to do is just channel some Dalen Dutzman for you. I did reach out to Dalen, and he was just very helpful in giving me a broad overview of the public health perspective in this COVID-19 outbreak. And so I'm going to be trying to just relay some information to you that Dalen has shared with me. And first of all, let me just kind of try to explain my understanding of the distinction between what I will refer to as the personal health perspective versus the public health perspective, and why I think it really was a good idea for Steve to ask John to speak on that personal health perspective and get some input from someone also with this public health perspective. So when we talk about personal health, typically we think about a physician in a clinical setting who is diagnosing symptoms presented by a patient and then designing a treatment plan for that patient. That's this personal health perspective. The public health perspective asks different questions and has a different view. And that public health perspective is not just what can I do to avoid this disease, and if I get this disease, then how do I survive and overcome this disease? The public health perspective says, what can I do as a member of a larger community to help the community overcome this disease or to avoid this disease? In any kind of communicable disease, John mentioned the plagues in Europe of the Middle Ages. We think about the flu season each year, various viruses. In any of those medical scenarios, you have a curve, or you may call it a stretch. And so it begins with some sort of an outbreak somewhere, and then it begins to spread, and so at some point it becomes epidemic. That is, it's infecting a number of people within a given population, and that continues to spread to the point that it reaches pandemic proportions. That is, it becomes global in its effect, or nearly so. And then at some point, that epidemic, pandemic, reaches a peak. And when it reaches that peak, it flattens out and eventually begins to decline. Even in those terrible plagues of the Middle Ages, when, frankly, society knew very little about those diseases, and in a lot of cases did all of the wrong things in trying to deal with them, even those plagues had this curve. They went up, they flattened out, they came down. What public health attempts to do is to shorten the peak of that curve and to shorten the stretch of that curve, so that instead of having this curve that goes very high and declines very slowly, we have a curve that doesn't go as high and declines more rapidly. So that's, in essence, the difference between the personal health perspective versus the public health perspective. And let me just give you a hypothetical scenario as to why that public health perspective is so important in this particular COVID-19 outbreak. So one of the pieces of good news about this particular virus is that it seems, at least from what we know at this point, that the younger and healthier you are, the less likely you are to have any kind of significant symptoms. Children, as a matter of fact, seem to be not immune to the virus. They get the virus. They have the virus. It does the same thing in their bodies that it does in anyone else's bodies, but they can have this virus and have virtually no, or at least very mild, symptoms. So typically in the flu season, when a virus is going around, when do we take that child to the doctor? When do we go for a diagnosis and treatment? Well, we go when they begin to present symptoms, right? They're coughing, they're having trouble breathing, they have a fever, and so we take them to a physician. But what if they don't have those symptoms? We don't keep them home from school if they or a significant number of their classmates aren't exhibiting some kind of symptoms. So, in this particular outbreak, we may have a significant population of those younger, healthier individuals who are in fact infected with the disease and who in fact can infect others with the disease, but they're exhibiting no symptoms. Now let's go to the opposite end of this spectrum, or to the other side of this coin. Just recently, the name won't come to me. Let's set it up hypothetically. Let's suppose that you have an elderly relative who's in a nursing home. Just recently, nursing homes here in this area began to announce that they were banning any visitors. And we may initially think, well, that's kind of extreme. Why would we do that? This virus is not rampant in our community right now, so why would we do that? Well, let's go back to that healthy 5, 6, 7-year-old who's not exhibiting any symptoms. What if they go to that nursing home to visit grandma or great-grandma or that nice old lady who used to live next door? Now we have that healthy, seemingly healthy population exhibiting no symptoms who are in fact infecting a very vulnerable population for whom this virus could very well be lethal. And so the public health sector says, let's make some recommendations in how we can stay ahead of this virus by preventing those more vulnerable populations from becoming effective by others who may not present symptoms at this time. So structurally, when we speak about public health, we all have heard of the World Health Organization. That is, in effect, a global community of about 7,000 people in 150 different countries. It's it was created by the United Nations in 1948. And with regard to these communicable diseases, their mission is to identify, mitigate, and manage risks. And so it was the World Health Organization that defined this particular outbreak as a pandemic, that is, a global threat. Within the United States, of course, we have the CDC, the Centers for Disease Control. That's a component of the Department of Health and Human Services. And their mission in terms of a pandemic like this is to identify and implement high-impact public health interventions to reduce infectious diseases. And so it was the CDC then that brought us these recommendations about hygiene, as Dr. John mentioned, about social distancing, just ways that we can avoid coming into contact with people who may have this disease. At this point, from a public health perspective, it really is more about what we don't yet know about this disease than it is about what we do know about this disease. There is no vaccine at this point to prevent this disease. We don't know just exactly how the disease spreads. We don't know just exactly what the best treatments are for this disease. And so public health says, given all the things that we don't know, what are some reasonable steps that we can take to protect this population rather than just how do we treat a particular patient? Now, I hope I've helped you to understand something about the public health side of this. I'm going to stop right there. I will simply say that if we have time for questions and answers at the end of the presentations, please be nice, because I probably am not going to have complete answers to your questions there. And finally, let me just say again, thanks to Dalen for the information that he has shared with me.
Certainly kind of tough following these two. You know, a couple months ago, we were talking about how to protect this family from an active shooter or some other type of violence coming into the building, something we could see. Now, who would have thought we'd be addressing something that we can't even see? But we do want to share a few things with you. As you know, there are congregations this morning who have canceled services and have indefinitely. There are congregations, religious groups who are meeting this morning, and we felt like that we needed this time together to hear from Dr. John and from Robert and to have this time together as a family. If you were here for first service, you did hear that we have suspended our services at least through the end of the month. That doesn't mean that the end of the month or 1st of April that we're going to start back. We don't know at this point. We don't know what the future holds concerning this disease. As shepherds, we are charged with protecting this flock, and we take that responsibility very seriously. As you know, we do have at the exits all over the building now, we do have hand sanitizers. And as Dr. John mentioned, we encourage you to use those as we interact as a family here. Also, Jeff mentioned in the first service announcements, it'll be mentioned second service. We are looking at opportunities to serve. There are those who will have needs, who are not able or afraid to get out. And so we want to take a look at those opportunities on a more individual basis, how we can help them. So be aware of that as those opportunities come our way. We want to make the best choices and decisions for this family. And we understand that you, as an individual and as a family, have to make choices and decisions for your family, and we encourage you to do that, to listen to the officials, the medical side, and make wise decisions for your family so that we can contain this virus and the spread of this virus. Also, I want to close by saying, you know, we've all faced struggles in our personal lives on a personal level, and we got through them. And sometimes it was difficult, sometimes it was harder than other times, but we got through those, and we'll get through this with God's help as well. You know, I think back in the beginning of November, I think about Keith and Nancy Moore. Life was great. And then they got hit with a tremendous load that they were not expecting. But with God's help, they got through it. And Keith, Lord willing, will be going back to work later this month. I think about the Cricks. Life was great. And one day Joey has a heart attack. And with God's help, through his surgeries, life is going in the right direction for him. And whatever this world hands us, with God's help, we're going to get through it. And we'll get through it as an individual, as a family, whatever it takes. I'm reminded of what Paul told Timothy in 2 Timothy 1 verse 7. He said, he did not give us a spirit of fear, but of love and a sound mind. And we can get through it, and we will get through it. Steve?
Thank you, Jim, and be thinking about some questions. We'll have them up here in just a moment, and I really do appreciate them coming up, because the reality is as they've noted, and I appreciate all of their humility, because I saw a cartoon the other day that somebody was reading. It says, wow, this is amazing that the same person who knew everything there was to know about whatever the last big subject was, now knows everything about this virus, right? I don't have a PhD in biochemistry and haven't been studying this, but you'd think some people might, because of the confidence that they know that we're all dead or this is all just a big hoax, right? So perhaps somewhere in between, right, we find our reality, but that reality is unfolding, as we move along. So we just have to respond to that. But and therein lies the problem psychologically for us and emotionally, is between this disconnect between what we hear and we see happening and what others are saying. Don't be alarmed, and that creates this void of confusion and disorientation, and nobody likes to live in such a state. That just fosters fear in us. And there's not really a way to completely rid ourselves of that until we see this and we get through it, and then we move on, and then, okay, it goes in a chapter of a lot of other things. I want to speak, though, John has mentioned about some things about the eating well, sleeping well, things like that. That would be good, probably. But I want to just appeal to Philippians 4, just briefly, that great passage that talks about dealing with trials. And in verse 4, Paul says, rejoice in the Lord always. So I think, for one thing, times like this is really good to just stop and remember how blessed we are. We take for granted that we can worship together. There's a lot of people in this world who cannot do that legally and face great persecution. How often are we thankful for the gathering that we can come together? Be thankful that we have our health. We're thankful to, just the things we take for granted every day. These kind of things help us to pause and reflect on the blessings of God. He goes on in verse 6, do not be anxious about anything, but in everything by prayer and supplication, make your requests known to God, and peace from God that surpasses all understanding, right, will be given to you. Pray. When you feel that anxiety building up, pause and pray and ask God for peace in that. He says, brothers, whatever is true, honorable, just, pure, lovely, commendable, excellent, worthy of praise. Think about these things. Perhaps, everywhere you look are headlines about. And that's why I'm really glad Joe preached something that had nothing to do with coronavirus, right? That we could unplug from that. Maybe have a reliable news source and every once in a while find out, but get away from this inundation about that. That will all do everyone probably some good for the most part. And think about lovely things, praiseworthy things, really good things. Just pause and consider some of those. Find a good book that has, not something about the apocalypse perhaps, but, something positive and encouraging, and invest yourself there. Certainly the scriptures have some great thoughts there as well we can appeal to. And he talks about here, it was kind of you to share my troubles. One of the best things for us to distract us is figure out ways you can help other people. Some of you have offered it, and it's a wonderful idea, perhaps to go pick up groceries for those who maybe are older or have compromised immune systems. So be looking out for those and your neighbors. Let us know if you're willing to do that, and we'll send out emails to members who don't need to be in any public gatherings right now, and we'll go and maybe get them some groceries. I know Mark and Deb are taking communion to some others. We're going to have probably a lot more that would be helpful for. There's a lot more things we could talk about there, but just a few ideas that might help us in the meantime. I'm going to ask you guys to come on up, if you would. Come on up here, if you will. And let's use the rest of our time for questions and answers. And for the sake of speed, rather than passing around a mic and all that, if you just raise your hand, and if you have, and then maybe stand up and let us know if you have a question for these guys. Does somebody have a question? Yes, Wilford. Okay, let me first of all state the question for the video. The question is basically, can we expect this virus to follow the same pattern as flu and other things? When the temperature rises, it will dissipate. Who would like to field that? John?
What I have heard is that there are some who are hoping that the coronavirus will be like other coronaviruses and influenza in the past, that it will dissipate. We will have less of it as temperatures increase, but we just don't know. Yeah, I mean, certainly dishwashers, washing machines, hot water, that's going to destroy any virus. But will the ambient temperatures outside, affect that? That's something we just don't know. I think it's projected.
All right. Who else has, anyone else have? Yes, Bryce.
Lori mentioned quite a few of the things that kill the virus. For household cleaners and things of that nature, what do we have around the household? Clorox, I've heard yes, no. Lysol, yes, no. So what is known other than the alcohol?
Okay, so the question is basically, what are some of the best things we can use to kill the virus? And perhaps with that, what are some things that are not that effective that we might be using, if there's anything in that category?
Again, my understanding is that it is the alcohol, it is any detergent. Soap will destroy the protein shell. I am not aware. I would assume that Clorox, bleach, and things like that would, but I don't have any information on that specifically, or Lysol.
Yes, Brian.
How will Hill continue to serve the community with his outreaches like children's closet, pantry? Will you be able to have people come and
Okay, so let me right. So the question is with some of the programs we have in place, like our Food Pantry, for example, the Children's Closet, how's Union Hill going to proceed forward with that?
When you have the heart of a servant, it's hard to shut them down. And that's the way Union Hill operates, has been from the beginning. And in talking with Mike earlier, they're going to continue the pantry. And I assume they'll continue the clothes closet. Are they going to do business differently? Yes. They're looking at maybe shutting it down to one day, maybe Thursday only, and setting items outside so there is not a interaction. So yes, Brian, they're going to continue to serve. How that looks in the next few weeks, will probably change from normal, but they will. Their concern is when you get to the end of the month, it seems to be the greatest need, and they're not going to close that door. And I appreciate that about them and about this family as well.
And so that may be just like a drive-through kind of setup where they come through, don't even get out of the car, given to them, and go. But we're going to continue to meet their needs. Yes, sir. Rod.
John, you mentioned that U.S. is a limited, you think,
Come on up, John, if you would.
as far as explain that. You said competitive, or I couldn't catch it.
Would you repeat what?
Right. So the question had to do with what the World Health Organization is claiming that the United States is currently at this time. And I'm looking for that on my notes. But on the website this morning, it's still a limited transmission capability. In other words, it's not like China where it's widespread. And so that's how they label it this morning. And that's why we're taking as many public health measures to try to help us not get like Italy, Iran, South Korea, and China.
Yeah, I guess the only thing I would add is that obviously a lot of the risk involved with this from a public health standpoint is population density. Just how close are we to one another? Obviously, that is very different in China than it is in most parts of the United States, but even within the United States, we have areas where people are very widespread and other areas where we have great density. So the World Health Organization, and I'm sure the CDC as well, categorize these things. This is one of the things I think that led to the recent identification of the COVID-19 virus as a national emergency. And that does a lot of things. One is that it frees up, the number I heard was about $42 billion in federal funding that can be allocated to the states for a variety of both preventative measures as well as treatment. One of the big concerns is that in dealing with this, we don't get to a point where the existing medical community gets overwhelmed with treatment. Because once you reach that point, then personal health and public health are severely compromised. So one of the things that this national emergency status will do, or can do, is to beef up capacity for dealing with those who are sick, as well as helping with those preventative measures.
Now, I know the bell is rung, but I want to continue here. If you need to go, get up and go, that's fine. But I'd say until we're going to continue if you have questions on some of these things. Scott? All right, so the recording, that's Scott Moore, Battlefield Fire Chief. He was just reminding us that this is impacting a whole lot of areas, including, for example, our medical services and 911 response. If you will, if you think you're having these symptoms, call and then be clear about what you think you're experiencing, and you'll be walked through where steps go. But that may change even the response level and how that comes to you. And again, this is all changing by the hour. Protocols do. And I would just say, remember that much of these drastic measures are more about proaction than reaction. We're trying to keep right? Even not having services, this isn't because we've got a bunch of people infected. This is trying to keep, right, our part for not just you, but also our community as safe as we possibly can. And so just being proactive here. Anybody else have a question? Dennis. Okay, let me start with that. So the question here is are there things like that we can do to help limit that, like drinking water? Or there's a lot of other people out there saying, here's things you can do that help keep this away or limit. Anything like that to add to?
No, and you bring up a good point. Hydration is very important. Hydrating ourselves is important because it makes our mucous membranes more able to defend against the virus. So it's important to do that. Some people are even advocating spraying nasal saline into your nostrils. Because again, that's where the virus is going to attack. It's not going to attack the surface of your skin anywhere. It's got to get inside. And that's why people will get runny nose, sore throat, upper respiratory symptoms. If it gets down into our lungs and causes us to be short of breath and we develop pneumonia, that's when cases get more severe. So how do we prevent that? The things that we've already said, but hydration is important.
Open the eyes of my heart, Lord. Open the eyes of my heart. I want to see you. I want to see you. Open my eyes, Lord. Open the eyes of my heart, Lord. Please open my eyes. Open the eyes of my heart. 'Cause I want to see you. I want to see